this is Circe reporting for KRFC 88.9 FM. Today we're talking with Lorayne Branch, who is the great-granddaughter of Henry Sutton. So, Lorayne, do you know what Ballarat was like when Henry's parents arrived in the 1950s and things?
1850s.
1850s?
Yes.
Not the 1950s.
Well, it was a bit of a rough and ready place, and there was just lots of mines and tents, and there weren't very many buildings at all. And a person would buy a 12-foot by 12-foot plot of land to dig for gold, and they'd have to have a licence to do that. And Mary and Richard did that. But after a small amount of time, they worked out they weren't very good at that. So Richard, being a musician and Mary being a musician, decided, well, he'd make a concertina to entertain everybody and the family. And all the miners loved the music. They didn't have much music on the Ballarat goldfields. And so Mary sent Richard off to Melbourne to buy some musical instruments and bring them back. And from there, the Sutton music store grew, and he opened a music store in a tent on the Ballarat goldfields.
When did they start gilding the building for the building, and when did it become really, really popular?
Popular. Well, it grew very quickly. Within 2 years, he'd moved from the tent to a wooden building on the main road, which was the main route into Ballarat, to catch the passing trade. And then that building became a bigger wooden building, but then his family kept growing and had more and more children, and they outgrew that. And so eventually, within 10 years, they had enough money together because they'd bought shares. The business grew, and they bought shares in mines, and they had a bit of money behind them. So they employed an architect to design a building on the main road, a permanent building, a brick building, and that still remains today. And that was really cementing the Sutton's music store in Ballarat.
Well, Henry Sutton was an inventor. So what kind of things did he invent?
Well, he was a bright little boy. By the time he was aged 10, he'd read just about every book in the local library. And then that wasn't enough, and his mother educated him, but she out-educated him. She couldn't keep up, so he just amused himself by tinkering, and he came up with a dynamo before Graham did. He experimented with flight. He was the first Australian to experiment with flight, and that's when he was aged 10. And within a few years, that was published in the Royal Aeronautical Society's in Britain's annual, and he's sort of renowned for that, coming up with the theory of flight.
That's pretty amazing, because my brother's in year 6, and he's just experimenting with little LED little light things, and by the age of 10, figuring out how things fly and things. That's pretty amazing.
Yes, so Henry came up with a torpedo and numerous other little things, but he progressed on as he grew. Yes.
Because I attempt quite a few things, but don't succeed. I try things, but I try to succeed, but I sometimes don't.
But every failure leads you to the success, which is great.
Which my brother does a lot, because he's kind of a tiny inventor too. And so, since you're writing a book, what kind of things about Henry Sutton's life and his family will be in it,
Well, it's really his history from when he first started inventing, and it goes in succession of his inventions and how one invention led to another. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, that was Henry's awakening in a sense. He was very excited about that, and at some point early on there he must have contacted Alexander Graham Bell, because they became great friends for the rest of his life, and they corresponded, and he actually collaborated with him on the electric light bulb, on the carbon filament later on. He made Australia's first telephone system, which he put in the family music store, which ran from the one in Main Street and which by this time they've opened one in Sturt Street in the main now, which is the big main street of Ballarat. So now they have 2 stores.
Which is now the one with the restaurant?
With the restaurant, yes.
Sutton's House of Music restaurant?
Yes. No, it was actually next door. Yeah. So they built that a little later when that land became available, which is in the 1890s. But they moved to Sturt Street in the 1870s. And so he ran a telephone line from the Main Street store to the Sturt Street store, and this was Australia's first telephone system. And he made over 20 phones, 16 of which were produced by other people overseas, because he didn't patent them, of course. Alexander Graham Bell really owned the patent for that, but he did come up with the first telephone handset that everybody knows today. When you pick up the telephone and you talk, then you've got and you've got the ear and the talking piece, whereas before that it was just you talk into on the wall and then you had the thing on your ear. He combined the two, which was really good. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Well, he went on then to, let me see, oh gosh, he did so much. All right, so he went on from the telephones, he went on to the electric light bulb, and in the process of the electric light bulb, which he made, I wouldn't say perfected, but his carbon filament was 16 days difference between Edison coming up with it and Henry's. He'd probably already done it, but he didn't make it public. And when he heard about Edison, he immediately went to Mr. Ellery, who was the head of the Royal Society of Victoria, and demonstrated his light bulb, but it was 16 days too late. So, but he probably had already done it by then. So, and then he went on to, in the process of making the light bulb, he came up with a vacuum pump, which created a perfect vacuum. And that was used around the world for over 20 years. And he gave that freely to the world. And there's one at the Ballarat, at Federation University in their archives that he gave to the School of Mines. And then he came up with a lead-acid battery, which brought him world acclaim by the time he was in his early 20s. And of course, this was big overseas, but not so big here. Of course, Australia, oh yeah, Henry did this, they're a big deal. You know. But overseas, he was applauded by Thomas Edison himself. Joseph Swan used his battery in the mines to light the lights in the mines because it was so effective.
And it was probably very dark because it's like 20 metres underground.
Yes, Henry's was very effective because it lasted a long time, and they had a lot of problems with lighting in mines. It can be very dangerous, but Henry's battery was very, very useful in that aspect. He exhibited his battery at the Crystal Palace Electrical Exhibition in 1882 in London. He came up with the first innovation, or what the books have recorded as the first feasible television system. And so Henry's been credited with that, and that's been ongoing since he did in 1885, which he published in 1890, and Scientific American republished it in 1910, his paper on that. And he was able to transmit a picture a short distance, but not a long distance, but not a moving picture. But he did that long before the person, Korn, who got the credit for that many years later. He did that long before Korn did. So that was a significant success for him. Yeah.
Thanks, Lorayne, for telling me all about Henry Sutton and the family and all his fabulous inventions. So this has been Circe from KRFC Junior Broadcasting, signing off.